Hello, everyone. Welcome to Smart Sex, Smart Love. When talking about sex goes beyond the taboo and talking about love goes beyond the honeymoon. My guest today is Dr. Eric Sprankle, a professor of clinical psychology and the co-director of the Sexuality Studies program at Minnesota State University, Mankato. He received his doctorate in clinical sexology from Xavier University in 2009, completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Minnesota Medical School's Institute for Sexual and Gender Health in 2011, and was awarded tenure in the psychology department at Minnesota State in 2017. Dr. Sprankle is the author of the recently published book, DIY, The Wonderfully Weird History and Science of Masturbation. Today, the topic of conversation with Dr. Sprankle is Go Fuck Yourself, the Masturbation episode. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. We were talking before how we almost feel like we know each other because of Instagram, but I feel like you have such a great sense of humor. If people, we'll do this at the end, but people need to follow you on Instagram and even Twitter. You're very funny.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right, before we begin, people would probably like to find out more about the unique title you chose for this podcast. Can you shed light on this?
Oh yeah, the Go Fuck Yourself piece. Yeah, that was just the working title of my book in early development stages. I'm talking like even before I had a literary agent, and I was just putting together the proposal. And I just thought that title just kind of captured the essence of the book, but then kind of realized the practicality of submitting that to agents and then subsequently to publishers may not be the best title to go with, and so that's when I switched it to DIY.
Yeah, isn't that too bad? Because although I think some book titles have that in there?
They do, yeah. I mean, even like bestsellers of like the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. So it was there, but I this is my first book, an unknown author, right? For the most part, coming out of the gate with something, it could have prevented it from being on shelves. So that was the concern.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially the topic, right? Sexuality, and masturbation. Right, I totally get that.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of the book, you talk about the devil or Satan. What role does the belief in the devil have in shaping attitudes about masturbation?
A lot, surprisingly. I had already done some academic research on Satanists and masturbation, so I knew I wanted to include just kind of like that really niche kind of topic in there, and the data, at least in a very, very small, brief section. But I thought I was going to have to like shoehorn it in, and just like it didn't really fit well. But surprisingly, it fit really nicely because there ended up being like this theme of the devil's influence throughout the book. And for those who think masturbation is a sin, there's belief that the devil influences people to masturbate, kind of like whispering in your ear to tempt you, things like that. And then there's also a belief that masturbation is some sort of sexual black magic that will open portals to the demonic realm and let demons into your life. So just like wild beliefs that were really fun to read about and write about.
You know, sometimes I'm so happy that I'm Jewish because everything that I was taught was in Hebrew and I didn't understand the word they said. So if they said any of this, I didn't catch it.
Yeah, I didn't get much from within Judaism about the devil. I do mention Judaism and kind of like interpretations of the story of Onan and everything, but it's pretty sans satanic. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me, I've had some Orthodox Jewish clients where because masturbation is forbidden, they find a way to, masturbate between pillows or against their beds. And then that's the only way that they can do it. They can't masturbate with their hand. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, and that's the funny thing about religion is that there's always loopholes, right, that you can find and create and justify for yourself. And sexuality is definitely one of those biggest ones that it's really important for you and find a way to kind of express your desires. And yeah, so you can just kind of find these loopholes that make sense to you. It's a little bit of mental gymnastics, but that's what religion is, right? It's just kind of finding a belief system that essentially works well with your life.
Right. All right. A subculture that gets explored in your book is men who go off to jackoff clubs and masturbate with other men. Yet it's reported some of these men are heterosexual. Will you talk about this and how is this possible?
Sure. I know you've talked about how men who have sex with men are not always driven by sexual orientation or sexual attraction to men or masculinity. So it's pretty much the same thing here, that they're in the minority, right? Estimated by jackoff club organizers to be only about like 10% of their members. So they're the small minority in the group. But for these guys, a few things can be going on why they enjoy going to jackoff clubs despite being heterosexual. So one, it could just be fetishistic, where the arousal is focused on the penis itself and less about the person attached to the penis. Could be exhibitionistic or voyeuristic, where the arousal is from watching others or being watched while you masturbate, regardless of the gender of the other person. Or it could just be a novel situation, right? It's not uncommon for teen boys to masturbate together, and it doesn't really have anything to do with their sexual orientation at that time. So it could just be reminiscent about those early experiences of partaking in just a fun, enjoyable activity with some like-minded bros.
This is so validating to me. You have no idea because, I talk about it with confidence. I know what I'm talking about, but,
Yeah.
I get a lot of kickback,
Sure.
lot of pushback. And so just having you, a professor and, schooled and researched around this, it makes it more validating.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we think of sexual orientation in very simplistic terms, but it's very complex. And you always have to like hone in on what is actually the target or object of arousal. And a lot of times it isn't about the other person's like gender and how it's expressed in terms of like masculinity or femininity, and more about the specific thing within the sexualized behavior or context. And actually, that's what's driving the behavior and driving the arousal. And it has nothing to do about gender, and therefore nothing to do about sexual orientation.
I had a podcast a few episodes before where we talked about these jackoff groups, and and I wonder if you know about this too, where there are rules in these groups, like not to touch and not touching below the waist. Is that true?
Right. Yeah, there's strict rules. It's different from bathhouses. There are a lot of different rules. It's focused on masturbation as the primary behavior. They do have rules of like no lips below the hips and nothing goes into anything, things like that. So like kissing is allowed and like stimulation of like chests and nipples and stuff like that. That's fine if someone wants to partake in that. But yeah, it is still kind of like the focus is on masturbation, and that's the goal. And there's other fun rules too about like where semen can go and can't go, and they have some clubs have different wristbands of what that communicates to other people, whether you're willing to like have your penis touched or not, just things like that.
And no friendly fire, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I had no idea how many gay men and even bi men went to these groups until I coined the term side. And I started this side group on Facebook, and we have like 8,000 members. And I can't tell you how many times somebody comes in and says they like to go to these things because it's all outer course and they prefer that over the intercourse.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a primary sexual outlet for a lot of guys who do prioritize solo sexuality, non-penetrative sexual behavior, and that this can be like their focal point in how they express themselves sexually, and it's a really good fit.
So some people seem to enjoy sticking objects inside themselves to masturbate. Can this be done safely, and what are some cautionary considerations?
Yeah, I had fun with this section for sure. People love sticking random objects into their rectum, their vagina, and even their urethra. That's one that a lot of people forget about. But pretty much everything that has been on a wedding registry has been in a man's butthole. So we're talking like every like household object imaginable. So how do we know this? This isn't just speculation. It's because there are dozens of academic articles and medical journals detailing case reports where this practice has gone awry and the person has ended up in the ER and then the subject of a very embarrassing case report about what the physicians pulled out of their body. So it can be done safely, though. Not everyone's going to end up in the ER, so that's good. So you just need to make sure that your eyes aren't bigger than your anus. So making sure that you're starting off slow and that the object can be inserted safely, size-wise, into your body, especially if you're inexperienced, and start small. There's also things of just making sure that the object has a flared base or a pull string or some other device that it cannot get lost inside of your body. That's a common reason when people end up in the ER. And then also just making sure that the object is sterile or sanitized. It can't break, doesn't have any sharp edges or splinters, and just making sure that you're very stocked up on lube and use it liberally.
And then can you talk about sounding? Because a lot of listeners won't even know what that means.
Yeah, sounding is just the insertion of objects into your urethra. And so all the same rules apply, and making sure it's not too big, especially if this is your first time, making sure that it has some type of flared base or a pull string. A lot of them do not. Like sounding kits are essentially just metal rods. So you just have to be very, very careful of like how far you're putting them in to your urethra, and making sure that they're sterile and, smooth, and lots of lube.
Do women do it too?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it doesn't know any gender. It is more common among men, or at least that's who end up much more so in the ER, especially with anal insertion, rectal insertion of objects. It's something that's like 30-1 in terms of more men to women. But no, it's not limited to just men. Women engage in these different types of insertion practices as well.
Mm-hmm. Till just now, I never even thought about women doing it. That's where my was a real question, because I've seen it online, or I've even seen it in porn. One time I was on Chatterbait and I saw some guy doing it, and I probably was a little squeamish when we first started talking about it. If people saw me, I'm not judgmental. I'm squeamish about things. That whole thing, even being catheterized, makes me squeamish.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for most people, I would say like you would get that kind of like squeamish response, disgust, even just shock, because it's a rare behavior, certainly not uncommon or unheard of, but certainly something that not the majority of the population is going to be participating in because of that response, which is understandable.
Yeah, they don't talk about it. Okay. A lot of people talk about and are concerned about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, which is called PIED, P-I-E-D, online anyways. Can you shed some light on the reality of this phenomenon?
Yeah, so this term is so common out there that it's almost just accepted as fact, and like it's a real diagnosis. So I'm answering these questions a lot from like students and other people, just like, assuming that this is a real thing and like wanting to shed some light on the reality of it. And the reality is that it's not a real thing. The empirical data have never established a connection between porn watching and erectile difficulties. So at best, you have a couple of case reports that detail some believed connection, but certainly not empirical like group data on it. And people are convinced that it's happening to them. So they'll show up in clinics saying like, I'm watching porn too much or whatever, and it's impacting my ability to get or maintain an erection with a partner. Like, so I need to stop watching porn. So they've made the connection for themselves. So it's certainly a reality in that way, the subjective experience of putting two variables together of one causing the other. However, what's likely happening is just a big culprit is just performance anxiety, and that there's no anxiety alone masturbating to porn. So your penis is operating the way that you want it to, getting an erection, staying hard until orgasm. No problem there. But with a partner, there's other dynamics to factor in, and can create some anxiety for the person, and anxiety works against your penile functioning. So you can have erectile difficulties because of that anxiety, not because you watched porn. It's just that the porn watching doesn't have any anxiety attached to it. Other things that can be more of a causal explanation than porn causing some ED problems with the partner would be, it's more about the masturbation than the porn watching. And so there can be something called idiosyncratic masturbation. And this is when someone just has a kind of a unique masturbation style that doesn't translate well to partnered sex. So sometimes if it's like a strong grip, it's called like death grip syndrome, that over time that your body just becomes accustomed to like this very tight grip on your penis while you're masturbating. And, oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex does not, provide that type of stimulation. And so your penis is not responding with an erection. And so you think it's like, oh, it must be caused by the porn that I'm watching, because I have no problem masturbating and getting an erection while I'm watching porn, but it's not working with a partner. It's like, well, it's actually the type of masturbation that you're training your body to respond to that your partner just can't replicate that well. And death grip is just one of those examples. I've seen times when guys have like laid down flat on their stomach and have just kind of grinded their penis up against like the back of their fists, like on their knuckles. It's like that works for them. It's stimulating, it's arousing, it easily leads to erection and orgasm. An anus and a mouth and a vagina do not feel that way. So their penis is not responding in an erection when they're with a partner. So again, nothing to do with porn, more about just how they're conditioning their body to respond to masturbation. And then the last thing, which I would say is maybe the rarest out of the three, but still something that would be worthy to explore, is what kind of porn are they watching? And is there something within that porn, the content, the themes, the topics, the behaviors that is more of a kink or fetishistic for them that they would need in real life in order to become aroused? And so there's just this discrepancy between what they like in fantasy and porn and what they're actually getting in real life. Now, for the majority of people, there can be a discrepancy and there's no problem. We have a wide range of what turns us on. We can have our fantasy and we can have what we engage in actually in real life, and everything works out fine. But for some, they have a more narrow kind of arousal template, and they are more fetishistic, so they may need certain elements that they find arousing in pornography that they just aren't getting in real life. And so then the focus would be, how can we get those elements also in real life? And that would actually lead to an erection.
So then the question then becomes, and thank you for all of this, because I'm sure you and I know I do get a ton of these questions all the time.
Yeah.
And then the guys they'll say to me, what's the remedy? Should I just stop watching porn?
No, because it's largely not to have anything to do with the pornography, right? So my focus is always similar to what we talk with women. It's interesting to like kind of gender differences that we have here. So if a woman comes in concerned that she's not able to be orgasmic with a partner, but she is able to be orgasmic through masturbation, like with the use of a vibrator, we don't say stop using the vibrator, right? And just focus on trying to have an orgasm through penile vaginal intercourse and try to do that only, right? We say, no, like, okay, you found something that works well for you. Your body responds well to clitoral stimulation with a vibrator. How can we get that type of stimulation when you're with a partner? That's the goal, to bring masturbation into the partnered life or the partnered sex life to make that more pleasurable, not to take away the pleasure from the masturbation. We do the opposite with guys a lot of the times. We view it like, okay, what are you doing with masturbation? That's not working with partnered sex. So you need to stop what you're doing with masturbation in order to be better with partnered sex. So what if we apply that's, some consistency there across the genders of like, no, you found something that works well for you alone and solo. How can you bring those elements into your sex life with partners? Whether that is something that you're watching in pornography, whether that is some type of unique stimulation that you're providing yourself on your penis, how can you bring those elements that are working so well for you and are pleasurable and leading to erection and orgasm now with a partner? And that requires a lot of like vulnerability and sharing, like, hidden arousals and different unique ways that you like to be touched, and requiring that communication. And that's the therapeutic issue, and not trying to just kind of, porn's bad, it's ruining your life. You need to focus on prioritizing your sex life with your partner. That should be the focus of your life. It's like, no, let's merge these two worlds. They can coexist pretty well.
Now they're going to ask, people will still be thinking, well, should I just stop masturbating for a while?
Yeah. No, like that's not really doing much either. Like, unless you're trying to engage in partnered sexual behavior within your refractory period, whatever that may be for yourself, and it's different for everybody. It can be like a couple of minutes for some guys, up to a couple of days, and you're trying, after you masturbated, to orgasm and are unable to have another erection in a certain amount of time. If you're trying to have partnered sex within that time, yeah, that can be a problem. You may need to kind of pace yourself with masturbation, or just time it a little bit better and have an open communication with your partner of like, when are we more likely to have sex, and how does that line up with when I want to have, time to myself to masturbate? But otherwise, if you're not working within that refractory period, it's really not about kind of like rationing your orgasms. It's more about dealing with the other things that are prohibiting or making it more difficult to achieve an erection. Things like performance anxiety, things like unrealistic expectations with the partner, not having the right type of stimulation, whether that's the direct stimulation on the penis or some type of erotic variable that needs to be included in the partnered sex. Those things can be focused on much better than trying to just abstain from masturbation from a period of time, because that's not going to get rid of the other issues.
I can't wait to have clients coming in at my group practice and my own practice and refer them to this podcast, because this is what they need to hear. You're saying it so well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So chapter 9 in your book is titled Till Death Do Us Part, Successful Aging, Assisted Living, and Romantic Necrophilia. What is romantic necrophilia? And will you talk a little bit about successful aging?
Sure. Romantic necrophilia is just a term that I made up. It's really like if there's any kind of overarching like narrative arch, so to speak, or arc in the book, it's developmental, masturbation across the lifespan. Chapter 1 focuses on childhood development. Chapter 9 focuses on older adults. And I start off with chapter 1 kind of even focusing on the ultrasound evidence of fetuses masturbating. So the thought was like, well, if masturbation exists even before we are born, does it continue in some way after we die, right? Just kind of have the bookend of the life experience. Well, it doesn't, continue after we actually die, but it can continue in a certain way, especially for our loved ones, in these kind of unique ways. And keep in mind, this is not going to be for everyone. This is more just kind of these interesting tales that exist out here. I'm not trying to like recommend like, oh yeah, everybody should be into this and you're weird if you're not. There's a company based out of the UK that can make sex dolls that look like your deceased loved one. And so if you are interested in having continued sexual relations with a doll that reminds you of your deceased loved one, there's a company in the UK that does that. And then there's also a Swedish artist that developed like this memento box that has, a little, iPod player or something like an MP3 player that can play some music that reminds you of your, deceased loved one. There's a little spritzer bottle in there for maybe some perfume or cologne to remind you. So just kind of like a multi-sensory experience of just kind of mementos, right? Also within that is a glass vibrator. And in the vibrator is a tiny gold urn that can hold 21 grams of cremated ashes. If your deceased loved one was cremated, and some of their ashes can be in that urn and then in the vibrator that can be used during masturbation. Again, now, whether people are actually doing this or these people are just creating kind of these devices to open up the conversation that we don't like having about death and sexuality and grief and when is the appropriate time to have like sexual feelings again, when is it appropriate to masturbate after the loss of a loved one? There's no etiquette attached to this. We don't like having these conversations, but our desires do not completely go away. They're going to be there. It's more about like having the conversations of like, what do we do with this information? How much can I integrate my solo sexuality into what I used to have with a partner, if at all, if I desire that? If not, it's just kind of giving permission to kind of explore some of these very, very taboo topics at this intersection of death and sexuality. Now, the successful aging piece was just more in response to the belief among a lot of physicians around the late 1800s that masturbation was incompatible with successful aging, in the sense that masturbation would prematurely age you and that it would lead to a premature death. And one of my favorite people to explore for this chapter was Dr. Emery Abbey. He was a urologist in Buffalo during this time in the late 19th century. And in his book, he wrote about a masturbator that it would lead him into, I'm just going to quote it here, into a premature grave loaded with violent forms of disease, with debasement of the human soul and the mind filled with obscenity and beastliness. And so this just belief that, if you masturbate, you're going to just age yourself very, very quickly. So if you're young, you're in your 40s, you're essentially aging yourself to your 70s while you're in your 40s, and you're just going to lead yourself to an early grave. And none of that's true, by the way, in case I didn't have to point that out. But
oh, wow. It's fascinating, though. And I hope the listeners are fascinated as they're listening to you. And there's a section in your book where you talk about unique ways in which some people masturbate, including sucking their own penis. Is this a common practice for gays? And are there unique ways you'd like to discuss?
Well, it's certainly not common successfully. Commonly tried, yes. But there's no prevalence data to suggest like how many people actually do this or are able to do this. Kinsey was really kind of the only one that even speculated percentage-wise of how many people could actually do that. And he put it at 0.3% of men have both the flexibility and necessary penile length to pull off this pretty fascinating feat. But no, it's pretty rare, and it only showed up in my literature review in some medical journals dating back to like the 1930s, where it was really treated as kind of like this freak show. This one guy, it was a forensic case. He was arrested for a lot of different types of sexual assaults. And he had this whole, pretty lengthy psychiatric history as well. But the whole case report focused on this one thing that just really fascinated his psychiatrists, and that was his ability and his compulsion really to suck his own penis. And so it was just viewed as kind of like this, freak show kind of novelty kind of act, and often, speculated that it was, the extreme form of narcissism because it forms like a literal ring of narcissism, right. And that it's definitely a behavior driven by like latent homosexuality, things like that. And even masturbation by hand is viewed sometimes as an expression of latent homosexuality because it's a man holding a penis, and that's gay, right? So it's really no different than that. It's that ability if somebody has the gifts, anatomical gifts to be able to pull that off. It says nothing about their narcissism or their sexual orientation, but right. it is still kind of viewed as kind of like this sideshow act. And it's no surprise that we had those rumors going around in the 1990s, like Marilyn Manson removed his ribs so he could suck his own penis. And it's like, well, if we think like a shock rocker is going to be doing that, that's definitely kind of how we view this behavior. But it's really not indicative of anything severe or psychologically wrong with somebody.
Your book is like a million myth busters.
It is, yeah. That's why I tried it to be.
And I believe this, and I don't know if you do. If most guys could suck their own penis, they would.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 100%. We would see so much absenteeism from work and everything. It would definitely take up a lot of people's time.
Yeah, it would. All right. What other messages would you like to leave our listeners with about you, your work, your book, anything?
Yeah, just the biggest thing with the book, I didn't set out for it to be this way. I really just wanted it to kind of like debunk a lot of the myths that we're still circulating today, and realizing that, it's the same myths that we've been dealing with for the past several hundred years. But really, it's really just kind of focusing on that masturbation is just this moment of pleasure, right? Nothing more, nothing less. We don't have to vilify it in the sense that it's not going to be harmful to your body. There's no evidence to suggest that. But we also don't have to put it up on this pedestal of something that we have to do for our overall health and wellness. It's really not having that impact on our body either. It's just a moment of pleasure, and that's good enough.
It's a great, great, great message. It's been a pleasure having you on my show, Eric. How can people find you on the internet or anywhere?
Sure. I'm at drsprankle.com and on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Sprankle.
I can't recommend enough people joining your pages because you're funny. You find things that I don't ever see on Twitter or on Instagram or anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I laugh out loud, literally. It's very entertaining, but educational as well.
Appreciate that.
You're welcome. All right. So if you can hear more of my podcasts at smartsexsmartlove.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. That's at Dr. Joe Kort, DrJoeKort. But then you can also go to joekort.com, where my podcast is also available. And you can learn more about what's going on in my practice. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and stay healthy.